Every family has a table, and at most tables, the trouble always seems to find the same person. In yours, that person is you. Someone says one honest thing over dinner, and the room goes quiet. And somehow, the quiet is your fault. A plan falls apart, an old argument flares up, and before anyone asks what happened, the eyes are already on you. It doesn't seem to matter what you actually did. You can walk in with a gift and barely say a word, and still end up being the reason the evening went wrong. Your family even has names for it. The difficult one, the dramatic one, too sensitive, too much. And after enough years of hearing the list, part of you started keeping it too. But the label is pointing at the wrong thing. In a house where something is quietly burning, nobody turns on the fire. They turn on the smoke detector, the one part of the house sensitive enough to go off. That was never a flaw in you. It was the job you were given. There's a name for what happened at that table and a study behind it. By the end, the difficult one won't sound like you. It'll sound like a job someone handed you. These are the 5 signs you were the one they chose. Sign 1. The blame finds you even when you had nothing to do with it. Think about the last time something went wrong at a family gathering and your name came up before the facts did. You weren't even in the room. You'd barely spoken, and still, the conversation bent toward you. Here's what most people in your seat do about that. You start keeping track. You get careful. You rehearse what you'll say before you say it. You stay a little quieter than everyone else. You try to hand them nothing to point at. And it never quite works, because the pointing was never really about what you did. There's a name for this, and it comes out of a study that has nothing to do with families. In 1988, 3 psychologists, Marquez, Iserbyt, and Lyons, showed people someone from their own group who stepped out of line, and someone from a different group who did the exact same thing. The outsider, they judged mildly. Their own member, they came down on hard. Harder than the stranger. They called it the black sheep effect. And a family is just the first group you ever belong to. A stranger who breaks the rules proves nothing. He was never one of you. But someone on the inside who breaks them puts a crack in the picture the family has of itself. So the group doesn't come down hardest on the outsider. It comes down hardest on its own. You were never picked out because you mattered least at that table. You were picked out because you were one of them. Close enough that stepping out of line actually cost something. And that's only the first thing the label was hiding. Because before anyone can become the one who takes the blame, something has to happen years earlier. Someone has to be chosen. And the choosing doesn't start with something you did. It starts with something you noticed. Every family has a weather system. Maybe it was one parent whose silence could fill a house. Maybe it was a tension nobody named but everyone planned around. You were the one who learned to read it. You knew, from the sound of a key in the door, what kind of night it was going to be. A child who notices the tension does the natural thing. They react to it. And that reaction is where the role starts to get handed out. Not in a single night, but through repetition until it hardens into who you are to them. Because now, the family has a choice. It can look at the tension everyone feels and no one wants to name. Or it can look at the one person visibly reacting to it and decide that they're the disturbance. One of those is much easier to live with. Back in 1960, 2 researchers, Vogel and Bell, described this as a quiet trade a family makes. When it can't face a conflict directly, it roots the whole thing through one member. And that member becomes the problem, because a problem you can point at is easier than one you can't. It's a clinical framework, not a lab finding, but you have lived the inside of it. That's the recruitment, not a punishment for being difficult, an assignment for being the one who couldn't stop noticing. Sign 3. Your family worked better because you were the problem, and no one, including you, was supposed to notice that. Here's the part that sounds impossible until you feel it. When a family has one agreed-upon problem, everything else gets to look fine next to it. The parents don't have to examine what's between them. There's a kid to worry about. The sibling who's actually struggling stays under the radar. The tension has a destination, so it stops leaking into everything. You weren't a crack in the family. You were the thing holding its shape. That's why the role is so hard to put down, and why the family pushes back so quietly when you try. The moment you stop being the problem, the real one comes back into view, and the whole system would rather it didn't. It isn't that they hate you, it's that you're load-bearing. Sit with what that flips. You weren't the weak point everyone had to work around. You were the reason the rest of them didn't have to. Sign 4. You left, and you kept doing the job anyway. For people who never asked, distance was supposed to end it. Your own place, your own life. And then a group goes quiet at work and your stomach drops the way it did at 14. A friend cancels a plan and an old voice says it's something you did. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You over-explain simple decisions because part of you is still building the defense before the accusation arrives. And this isn't only a feeling, it leaves a track you can measure. One study followed families across several years and watched one specific thing. As a child received relatively less warmth than a sibling, that same child's depressive symptoms climbed over time. Not a snapshot, a slope measured across years of growing up. The unequal treatment didn't just sting in the moment. It bent the line the child's mood traveled along. Be careful with what that says. It's a pattern across many families, not a sentence passed on any one person. Plenty of people carry this and are fine. But if the reflex I just described felt specific, the flinch and the preemptive apology, you might recognize the shape of that slope in your own life. Sign 5. One day you go quiet, and the family's problem doesn't get better. It goes looking for somewhere new to live. For you, it feels like giving up in slow motion. You stop raising the thing that bothered you. You skip one dinner, then two. You give the shorter answer on the phone. You call it keeping the peace, being the bigger person, protecting your energy. And some of that is true. But watch the other side of your leaving. The tension you used to absorb doesn't vanish. It often surfaces somewhere else. A new argument, a new, difficult one, a sibling who suddenly can't do anything right either. The fire was never yours. You were just standing closest to it. And leaving has its own cost. You don't get to walk out cleanly. You carry the guilt of the empty chair, even when leaving felt like the only choice you had left. You're not rare in that either. In a national survey, the sociologist Carl Pillemer found that about 1 in 4 adults had cut off contact with a family member, which leaves the question this whole thing has been circling. If you were never the fire, what were you doing in that house? You were not the problem in your family. You were its solution to a problem no one was willing to name. That's not a compliment, and it's not a promotion. It's just a more accurate description of the job. A family under strain needs somewhere for the strain to go. It doesn't hold a vote. It tends to settle over years on someone, often whoever reacts to the tension most visibly. And it treats that person as the reason, because a reason is easier to live with than the truth. Let me be precise, because this is where these videos usually oversell. The black sheep effect shows that groups judge their own members more harshly than outsiders for the same misstep. It does not prove your family scientifically picked you. What it shows is the thing you always suspected and could never say. The harshness was never proof that you were the worst of them. It was proof that you were one of them. Close enough that your stepping out of line actually cost something. Not the problem in the house, the container it was handed to. You won't need 5 steps for this. You'll need 1. The next time the room goes quiet and turns to you, do one thing before you start defending yourself. Ask what was already happening before anyone looked at you. Then decide what's actually yours to own and hand back the rest. You don't have to volunteer to carry what was never yours. That role even has a name. The person a group loads with its trouble so everyone else can feel clean is called the scapegoat. But the name was never the point. This was. The difficult one was never who you were. It was a job, and it's the one job you're allowed to quit. If this sounded like your family, you already know you're not alone. Subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.